Right, in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the performance things that have been done over the years to increase the horsepower, and especially with turbo. And one of the things I want to talk to you about in this video is about how that in the early days, there was a 15-pound like wall with boost. It was like as soon as guys tried to put more than 15 pounds of boost in their Volkswagen, it was like you started having problems. And that was like the number one thing was like, man, don't run more than 15 pounds. I remember hearing that from every turbo guy around. Then we're going to talk about just some of the stuff that I know. Listen, I'm not the best expert at all this stuff, racing stuff. I just been around guys, so this is secondhand information mostly. This isn't from me doing it, but from being around those guys has helped me do my own car. So I thought maybe if I share it with you guys could kind of use the information and maybe look into it a lot more, of course, and do some reading on that, and then find out how do you want to do yours if you wanted to do something performance wise. The first thing was the 15 pounds threshold for boost. How did they get past that? It was like a wall. It was like if you ran more than 15 pounds, you'd split a barrel. That was the biggest thing. You'd start hearing about guys splitting barrels. I believe the first thing that guys started to do is they would make their own barrels. So they would make these thick barrels, and then if I remember right, they didn't even have fins on some of them, where they would run them at the track and just run them a couple runs, and that was it, to try and get the barrel to be really, really thick and not split. But I don't think that worked very well because there's not any support. Part of the support system of your barrel is these fins right here. So they figured out that is what was supporting it, and why that it would stop and there would be a split right here at the top of the barrel, where was where you get your barrel splits from running too much boost. So some of these guys are just geniuses, honestly. They figured out what to do, and they were like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we make a barrel, okay, that has, cast a new barrel that has another fin. So what they've done, and this is what the racers run, and like those engines from, I believe the ones you get from Autocraft have the barrels that have additional fins, 1 or 2 fins on here. And what they did is they made it so that it has more fins. Now the problem when you do that is your heads, right? Your heads only have this big edge here. Now if you take and put 2 more fins on here, right, 1 or 2 more fins, then your barrel is not going to fit in your head. So what they did is they figured out to machine this surface right here. So they would machine this whole area, and they just take it and put it in your mill, and they just machine that sucker down, take an end mill and just start working it, and machine that thing down to where the cylinder would fit with that extra fin on it. And when they did that, that's when they were able to beat that 15-pound brick wall that everybody was hitting. So I was talking to the racer about this stuff, that one of the guys who did it, and so they, all these guys collaborate together. It's just like the amazing thing about Volkswagen racing is everybody, it's like the challenge is not just to try and beat each other, it's to try and make these old air-cooled engines go as fast and get as much horsepower as you can out of them. So again, that strengthened the cylinder. Then they just took the machining off of here. Of course, you lose a fin on your head, you lose a little bit of cooling, but that would get you to that, get you down the track just a little bit faster. Another amazing thing that's happened over the years is the fact that we have so many better heads out there, so many better options for heads than we used to. In the old days, you had to take your stock heads here and try and do as much as you could with them, and guys were punching out the valve seats, which is here, your valve seat. They'd punch that out and put a bigger valve seat in so they could put bigger valves in it. But then when you did that, you'd have less strength between the weakest point, which is the spark plug and the valve they used to crack a lot there. So some of the new castings they've made, like the AA Performance and also CB Performance has their Ponchito heads, and they have a couple of different ones. I'm just know those ones off the bat that have the peanut-sized plug and more meat around the spark plug. So they have longer threads. The old Volkswagen spark plugs had a really short thread. The new ones have the longer threads, so they have more threads going down there, and it's a little bit smaller. I forget the sizes, but it's a little bit smaller threads, I think, and it's a little bit longer. So you have more meat around the spark plugs that they've done. They've changed the shape of the combustion chambers to try and get them to fire more fire in the cylinder. Because a lot of guys, what they'll do to keep the compression ratio from being too high is they'll put additional shims in on the cylinder and to try and push the barrel out further, right? And you end up with a thicker deck height. So guys, the original deck height was normally like 60 thousandths, and they'd go to 70 and 80 and 90 thousandths in the cylinder, and then you get something what we call is barrel fire. So if you get barrel fire going on, then what happens is it increases your detonation. So some of the racers that I knew that were running NA, like normal naturally aspirated, is they would put do something like make a head gasket for their they made a copper gaskets for their heads, and they would run their stuff all the way to 0. So they'd have like a 40 thousandths or 50 thousandths copper gasket on the top of their cylinder, and they would put their deck height to 0 and try and fire everything in the cylinder or in the combustion chamber, which is more like your Chevys and Fords and things like that. So you were able to get more compression ratio and have better less detonation by doing that. A lot of the stuff was done on the track. I don't know about the street results from it, but that's just stuff that I've learned. So some of the things we've learned over the years is the real problem with your Volkswagen heads, the biggest problem is your exhaust flow. If you can see inside there where the valve seat is, there's the seat boss for the valve seat has a very narrow area, and I can't even get my finger through there. What we would do, it was take and port that and round that corner off so that the air could just flow right through there. And then some guys were actually taking the whole valve guide boss out. I don't usually do that myself. I'll just cut a lot of it away, and then with a porting tool, and try and get that exhaust to go around that corner nice and smooth. So I would take it off there, and then what I do is take off some up here to make it on this part, to really try and make that exhaust flow. Let me get you back a little bit so you can see, flow around the corner to flow out better. So even with stock heads, I run on my 1904 in my bus, I have those heads that I actually ported many years ago and did that too. One of the things that we also found out is on this part of your head. I'm using this one. This is kind of a roached out head, okay, but it just doesn't have valves in it, so I'm using it as an example. But what we used to do is cut this out. Now, one of the things you're going to run into, and let's look at the other head. So again, if you look at like the Ponchitos, they're already pretty well wedge ported the way that we would do it. They already are without having to port them, but you could even do more to them probably than what they do and get them even more performance. And I think they sell those they take the Ponchito heads and then do their own porting to them and sell them at a higher dollar amount. They're a little expensive. So, but for you guys who want to do it yourself, this is the way that I did it, and it worked really well for me. One of the things you don't want to hit, and you'll notice down in here where the seat spring is, if you go down into the port, you can see inside there that little bump right inside there. If you can see there, that little bump there, that is the bottom of the spring seat. Okay, so you don't want to take too much off of that. I've taken a little bit off, but it all depends again on what springs you're running. If you're running dual springs or something like that, you're going to have more pressure. You got to think about all these things, especially if you're running straight cut gears on your cam. That kind of beats up your valve train. So, you know, I try and not run those. Yeah, they sound cool and everything else, but it does kind of beat up all this stuff. There's a vibration that goes on. It's like a sonic cleaner. All that cam gear lash kind of does what a sonic cleaner does, and it just vibrates everything a little bit and then just wears stuff out. I mean, there's times when you need to run straight cut gears because you've got such a large cam that the actual resistance from that will cause wear in your case. So like here on this, the poor example again, with this engine here, if you've got, you know, don't have straight cut gears and you've got dual springs and you're running really super high RPMs, you're going like 7,000-8,000 RPMs, and not, if you go to those kind of numbers, you better have real pistons and real rods. None of this little cheap stuff. You got to get into the big money stuff like Carrillo rods and you know, JE or Wiseco pistons, stuff like that. You know, the money just starts to flow when you get into that stuff. So, and you better have a really big oil pump. So you have your gear here, and when you have those, what are they called, the angle cut gears, what it does is it puts more pressure on this bearing right here. Because you have a very large cam, there's a lot of spring pressure as it goes. One of the ways to eliminate some of that stuff is they've gone to these FK series cams. The FK7 is like I guess it's the similar one to the Engel 110. They've gone to these FK series cams where you're running less lift and duration, or less lift and then the same duration or whatever, and then what they do is they have you put on a ratio rocker so it's a little softer on the valve spring seats and stuff like that to keep the wear down so that you can still run the stock type gears. That's why I don't run the really cool sounding straight cut gears in mine unless I have to. And I'm definitely not going to be running up over 7,000 RPMs on anything that I'm running, so keep that in mind. So anyway, this port, what I've done before is make it so that these two are almost basically touching. There's like a hairline right in the middle, and wedge them in so that, let me just draw that. So I'll kind of draw it out. So what I do is I kind of cut here. You've seen the heads before like this, right? Kind of wedge port them a little bit. Not quite, maybe that much. That's a little too much. Take it out here. Take some out there. Bring these ones together where they're just like that. I'll just kind of work them like that. Doesn't take that much. And then what I'll do is I'll take all these out quite a bit larger on this portion. Okay, that's what I do on mine, is I take them out that way. Then I won't take very much off of this little guy in here. Okay, but what I'm trying to do is get it to be Venturi ported so that it's larger at the top, smaller at the bottom, and it accelerates this airspeed going in. So then I'll match port this to my intake manifold. This stuff you could do yourself. Just got to be careful. What you don't want to do, the do's and don'ts. One is you want it to be Venturi ported where it flows and speeds up the air. What you don't want to do is you don't want to take anything too much off of things like that spring support there. You don't want to cut through anywhere. if you cut through, you're gonna have to weld it up, and then if you weld it up, then it's losing its strength. It's not the same as if it was casted that way. So, keep that all in mind. Sometimes take an old junk set of heads like this old junker here and practice and do one on there, and port that sucker out and see what you can get out of it. Maybe you can just go to the point where you cut through, then you know where you're at. But I'll tell you, every head's different. They're not all exactly the same. So if you take it to that edge, you're probably going to have issues. I've never had to take it to that much. It just doing what I'm talking about here made a huge difference. Taking that off there, opening up the exhaust. What I did to those single port heads I did by just doing almost everything was in the exhaust made a huge difference in the performance. Funny thing is, you ride in my 1904 that's in my red bus, and you ride in my 2007 that I didn't do anything to the heads on that's in my other one, and they're like almost neck and neck. Probably, I think maybe the 1904 would beat it in a drag race. Another thing I just learned about just the other day is running E85 and going high compression. He went up to 13-to-1 running E85, and he doesn't have any ping. That's amazing. So there's that thing you can do if you really want to go. There's just a bunch of different things you can do. I'm just telling you a little bit about some of them. Again, I'm not the race engine building guy. I just have been around them a bit. So I've learned a few things, and I've done some of these things to my own cars, and I've gotten a lot of performance out of them for doing it. And over the years, all that stuff's evolved, and companies like Autocraft has, developed an engine that, and Scat and some of the others have developed parts and engines that have a lot of these things into them already. So, like Autocraft engine, I think they added on theirs, I think they added 2 more holes. So you have 6 on the barrels for those, and so they can handle all that boost pressure. I mean, there's guys running now 30, 40 pounds of boost. Man, if you're going to do any of those things, you've got to update the crank and the rods. Back in the old days, we could get, the real Okrasa crankshafts. They were really expensive then, but in today's dollars, they would be pretty cheap. And, you had the better steel. But even these 4340s, you can use those from China, and they're not too bad, as long as you don't start getting into the real horsepower. If you start getting over 300 horsepower, you're going to have major issues. You have to go to the dollar signs go just through the roof. Back in the older days, we always ran Carrillo rods. Now, these aren't Carrillos, obviously, but I'm just showing you as an example. I don't have any here. I don't have that kind of money, and I wasn't building those engines back then. My friends did. They had Carrillo rods, and they had Okrasa crank, and they were, pushing some serious horsepower and 15 pounds of boost. At 15 pounds of boost, you could get a car that was pretty fast. I remember my buddy taking me out for a ride in his bug he had a 1776 with Okrasa crank, Carrillo rods, and running 15 pounds of boost, and driving it through first, second, third, and third gear was the amazing spot. He had 388s. He hit third gear, and I was just sitting in the car, and I just watched the speedometer go from whatever, like 50 something, all the way to 90 within a few seconds. Just whoop, like that. I was like, oh my God. So I'll tell you, you don't need to have a lot of boost to run, have a lot of fun, to run the street, but you still need to spend a lot of money. And that was back before, when we were running the side draft carburetors, when they figured out that the other issue they figured out was that the side draft carburetor would run the float blows dry, and then you'd lean out at the top end, and so there was a limit there. So they started going with the Holley double pumper, I think is what it was. Again, I'm not the racer. I don't remember the exact ones they used. They went to those, and then now they're doing more stuff with injected. So you have, you know, a metered fuel supply that doesn't run lean on you. And with injection, the cool thing about that is when you have a turbo, it's kind of like putting a magnifying glass on your jetting. So when you're jetting a turbo engine, it has to be literally spot on. Just like if you're riding a dirt bike, you know, two-stroke dirt bike, it would change if you went from, like, you know, if I jet it in the city and then I rode it in the desert, I better jet it for in the desert, because if I didn't, it would actually burn up the engine. Same thing happens with turbo. It's so sensitive. So that's one of the reasons that some of this fuel injection stuff has just made the game just so much better. You know, CNC machines, fuel injection, a mill that you can buy, affordable price you can put in your garage. All those things have just changed the whole game for Volkswagens and made them have so much more horsepower than they did back in the early days. I remember back in my early days, there was MIG welders were $1,500, and they dropped to about $600, man, and it was like all of a sudden the whole thing opened up for metalwork and bodywork. And when you could just go down to places like Harbor Freight and start buying a mill, yeah, they were crappy, but they had one, you know, and you could start out with that and then work it up, and then you could. And they started making these other cheap mills and stuff like that, and you could do your own. Then CNC kind of came out, the computer, you could, you know, scan stuff and make parts, and, you know, it's totally different now than it was years ago. It was all done by hand then, but you have all these tools available that you just didn't have back then. So some of those things are made it a lot more fun for some of the guys. You know, it is still really expensive, but just a couple little things I thought I'd share with you guys on performance. And I know you guys are all interested in performance. Everybody wants to go faster, you know, but there always is a price, and so you make sure you keep that in mind. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'd like to see your comments on that and see what you guys think, and hopefully some of this stuff you could take with you and maybe help you build your car, make it go a little faster. Talk to you in the next one.